talking about that 26th pick.
Yeah.
So Wyatt Johnson was acquired or was drafted in a year when the Detroit Red Wings were desperate to get up from the 22nd pick to 14th to draft Sebastian Cossa, who is a big goaltender. He played for the Edmonton Oil Kings in the WHL. That was in 2021. So in exchange for the number 14 pick, the Stars received the 22nd pick, the 47th pick, and the 137th pick, fifth rounder, to allow the Red Wings to move up from 22 to 14. That 22nd pick turned into Wyatt Johnson. That 47th pick turned into Artem Grushnikov, who the Stars used to acquire Chris Tanev at the deadline. And the fifth round pick didn't amount to much, but still, very impactful trade by trading down, and leads us to that 26th pick of the Jets, which primarily you would think the Canadiens are going to use in some sort of trade. Now, we'll get to the possibilities of what they might do if they don't trade it, but we had a lot of questions in the mailbag. We've had a lot of questions in general lately from you guys asking how the Canadiens can use that pick to move into a position where they could potentially pick a higher impact type of player. Yeah. I got bad news for you. It's not very likely that it's going to happen. Now, it could happen if the Canadiens were to package that pick with a player on their roster or in their system that interests a team, a player or two. But looking purely at picks over the last 5 or 6 years that were used to move up, the most relevant trade happened in 2022. The San Jose Sharks had the number 11 pick that year. The Arizona Coyotes traded them the number 27 pick, 34, and 45, so 2 more second rounders to get from 27 to 11. That 34 and 45 is something the Canadiens don't have. So you could argue that if you add one of their defensemen or maybe even 2, you can replicate that type of value, but that's what it costs to get from 27 to 11 in 2022. Aside from that, I just mentioned the Red Wings going from 22 to 14, so that cost them a second and a fifth. That was in 2021. In 2021, the Wild traded down from 19 to 21 and got the 89th pick from the Oilers to do so. There's very few examples, but it's generally costly. In 2019, the Coyotes again traded up from 14 to 11 with the Flyers, and had to give up number 45 to just move up 3 spots. Moving up 4 spots for the Rangers in 2018 cost them the 48th pick. They moved from 26 to 22. 48th pick is something the Canadiens don't really have right now. They do have the Avalanche's second round pick, which will obviously be a bit later in the second round. So looking at the recent history, the Canadiens, based solely on their draft capital in this draft, don't really have the ammunition to do it. Now, they do have 2 first round picks next year. And so they could, in theory, use one of those picks, whether they're comfortable using their own or the Flames pick in the first round next year, package that with the 26th pick, and then maybe you can really make some headway and get up into the teens. But it's costly. Is I guess the whole point of this exercise is that it does cost a lot to move up that much.
But why would Montreal do that anyway? What's the point in trying to improve your, like, using some of your ammunition, your trade chips to go from 26 and improve your draft rank and go in the teens, let's say? Is it because you have a chance that Beckett Seneca is still going to be there? Is it because you have a chance of drafting Cole Yzerman in the mid-teens? Because there might be a good defenseman still? I just don't get it. I don't think that the Canadiens are there anymore and trying to find ways to add some more draft guys, especially if it's not at the top of the board. If you were telling me the Canadiens are going. They could use the 26th pick in order to go from 5 to 4. It's probably what it would cost them, because the guy that they want is still there. Maybe, but I
Yeah.
would say that if the Canadiens choose to move the 26th pick, it will be in a hockey deal. It would be
Yeah,
in an actual trade,
absolutely.
not to trade up and it from an abstract trade up of draft picks in order that they reposition themselves better in the draft. I don't see
Well,
that.
well, well, first of all, I mean, I don't think Seneca is going to make it to 13, 14, whatever it would be. But if he does, I think that would be a reason to do it. I mean, if he's still around,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's, but yeah, it would take a specific set of circumstances, and I think people kind of, a lot of the questions that we got in the mailbag, at least, they're like, listen, we could add potentially 2 top 6 forwards in this draft if it plays out right. And the Cole Eisman example, I think he's likely to be available in that
Oh yeah,
range.
yeah,
Depending on how the Canadians view that, it could be something. But yeah, it's one of numerous options that they have with that pick. And I do think what you mentioned is using it in a hockey trade um, is the most likely scenario. So, and based on the last 2 years, especially last year, I mean, that's what they did, right? So it's just, I'm just saying that it only reinforces your point. Like, not only do they not have a huge reason to do it, they don't really have the proper ammunition to do it either. So it doesn't make sense from that point of view as well.
yeah. So it's about finding the best way, the best use for that 26th pick. And I'm sure that in the weeks prior to the draft, the work must have already started, and there must be phone calls that have been made and fillers sent out to gauge the interest and the value of that pick. Some teams might have forwards available and they're short on draft picks, and they'd be open to have another guy in the first round, albeit it's like further down the board. Um, but if the Canadians want to dangle that pick and do a hockey trade, I think it would be
Mm.
their first option. And if nothing's confirmed or nothing's done before the draft, then they could use it differently. You're talking about using it to trade up. There's not much room to trade up in the draft from that first round pick won't get you from 5 to 2. Probably won't
Mm.
get you from 5 to 3, but it could enable you to get from 5 to 4. But that means that the Columbus Blue Jackets would not want the same player as the Canadiens would seek at number 4, and for that reason, Columbus would say, you know what, we'll get that extra pick and we'll get our guy at 5. So
Right.
that's the only situation where I see a trade
In
up
which case,
happening.
the Canadians might be like, "Oh, they're willing to do this trade. Well, let's not do it because they're probably not going to take our guy."
That's it.
Yeah.
So
So,
basically, if there is a fit, it's because it's not worth doing it, and you just stand pat and you wait for your pick. So there's there's a lot of intel that'll need to be done on that part. So it's I don't. Although last year, I mean, it was clear that at number 4, Will Smith would be the guy, right?
yeah.
And the Canadians still made some attempts to go from 5 to 4 in
Mm.
order to secure Will Smith, and then after the top 4, Reinbacher was their next best option past that top 4.
Mm.
So it didn't work, but I could see a similar situation happening this year if for some reason Demidov is not taken in the top 3. So then they would have to dispute with Columbus for that pick. So, but I think that there's a possibility also that they just might hold on to it and draft someone.
Yeah, there's a possibility, and it's yeah, for sure, because there's a lot more there's a lot more moving parts this year for the Canadians than in past years. You know, the situation on defense being as crowded as it is definitely a desire on the Canadians' part to kind of monetize some of that depth. Um, the extent to which they could do that, you know, kind of depends on what you consider the value of some of these guys to be. Like, does Justin Barron have much trade value? Does Jordan Harris have much trade value? Does Jaden Struble have much trade value? I mean, it's that group. Um, you know, what can they actually get you? And I think they're about to find out. They're going to try. I think there's going to be discussions involving a wide range of defense, both prospects and players. But that 26th pick, along with one or even two of the guys that I mentioned, now you're talking some pretty decent value for another team looking to make a trade. So, but in terms of guys that might be available there, I mean, there are some guys that might legitimately interest the Canadians that could be around at that spot. Really unpredictable draft, and it's widely considered to have pretty significant drop after the top 15 or so. But still, some guys that could be worth taking a chance on, adding to their pipeline up front. A few guys that I'm curious about. I don't think any of these. Well, I don't think the first two guys I mentioned will be available at 26, but Cole Baudouin out of Barrie, big guy, fitness freak, has just kind of a motor that doesn't stop. He's very strong, fits kind of the playoff style, physical forward profile the Canadians are looking for. And Sacha Boisvert, local product, plays in the USHL, Muskegon, going to North Dakota next year. Another bigger guy who can play and who will probably be gone by 26, but would obviously check a couple of extra boxes for this organization, being a local kid. Are two that kind of come to mind for me as possibilities of being there at 26. Now, can you bank on either of them being there? Probably not, because they're probably not going to be there, but they're two guys that
I don't know
kind
about
of
Baudouin,
jump
though.
out.
But yeah, Baudouin has a chance to be there at 26.
He has a chance, but I'm saying you can't. He's a chance he'll be gone too. Is all I'm saying. Like, it's not a sure thing. You know, the sure things are guys that are kind of projected to be later. But I think those are two guys that I think the Canadians would probably jump on if they could with that pick.
Yeah. So back when they were with the Rangers, Gorton and Barbroff drafted Keandre Miller at 22. And there's potentially a guy that's drawn parallels to Keandre Miller, and his name is E.J. Emery.
Another fitness, another physical freak of an age. Like, I mean, absolutely. Just in terms of his conditioning and his muscle and everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So tall, right-handed shot defenseman who maybe has not shown a lot of offensive just yet, but and neither had Miller back then, but it could. There's comparisons that are drawn between the two guys. I think that if the Canadians draft a forward, with the number 5 pick, I think that there's a chance there, like in that second wave of defensemen after, like, you've got the top 6 defensemen that are clearly established in everybody's minds, but after that, there's a second slate of defensemen there where there might be someone of interest for Montreal, especially if he's a righty. So Emery, for me, could be an interesting option at 26. And there's this guy, this Russian kid, Yegor Surin.
Yes.
He's meant to be like this crazy guy who hits everything he sees. He's also, creative centerman. Has been playing in the MHL this season, and he provides an interesting ingredient to your recipe, something that that's probably not many players can provide. So if he manages, if he's considered to be having enough offense to be translatable in the North American game, and he's also, if the scouts believe that he's a guy who can show enough responsibility to not put his team in trouble too often, he could certainly be an interesting spark to get late in the draft. So late in the first round. So Surin, Boisvert, Baudouin, Emery. Those are four. Between those four, there should be one that'd be still available at 26, but they're totally different players. All of
Yeah,
them are like four. It's like opening four different doors, even between Baudouin and Boisvert, because Baudouin is more a defensive first, I guess, type of
yeah,
centerman, whereas Boisvert,
kind of a third line center
yeah,
profile. Yeah.
exactly. Whereas Boisvert shoot first mentality
Mhm.
centerman. I don't. I wonder if he won't be moved to the wing at some point in the pros. We'll
Yeah.
see. But he's a bigger guy too. So it's anyway. Those are interesting profiles. But
Well,
um,
one thing on Surin too to add is that as reported earlier, the Canadiens did get into Russia a couple of times this year to look at Demidov in the MHL, and so they would presumably at the same time have been able to see him live playing in the MHL. So that's another kind of factor to consider there. And
yeah,
yeah, he's got a tantalizing profile, but the fact that not every team did get into Russia, in fact, few teams probably did, um, might slip as a result.
yeah.
Whereas he would otherwise, like several Russia players over the last couple of years have done, would otherwise have been taken higher. So that's a possibility as well.
Yeah. So before we wrap up that portion, so you mentioned that if the Canadiens were to combine one of their like two of their overflow of young defensemen and their 26 pick, they could get somebody interesting. Um, I want to go back to Martin Necas because there's something interesting that happened on the heels of the Hurricanes being eliminated. Is that there are like renewed reports, including an interview that his father gave in Czechia, uh, pertaining to the fact that Necas would seek a trade and would hope
Mm-hmm.
to sign his next deal uh, with another organization. He's still 2 years away from free agency, so he's 25. Um, do you? There's no doubt that there's going to be demands for that guy. I mean, there's at times I thought that his playoff performances were not super convincing, but there were other games where he was literally flying in there and found some chemistry later in the playoffs with Jordan Martinook there. But he's
Mm-hmm.
a guy who can play both circles on the power play. He's finally decided to shoot more this year, and he's got a great one timer. Um, I mean, he can carry the puck in, even though now I think it's well established that he's going to be a right winger and not a centerman, but he can carry the puck in, do some good give and go. He can drive the net. Um, there's a lot to like in that guy, but I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if the Canadiens can manage to build a package that's going to be interesting enough, uh, to beat the other offers that the Carolina Hurricanes might receive. That's one. That's part one, and part two is according to Evolving Hockey, the projection on a 7-year deal for Necas would be roughly $7.5 million a year.
Mm-hmm.
Would you be willing to give that sort of money for a guy that reached 70 points only once in his career, and he's in his mid-20s now?
Well, I think one thing that the Canadians look at, they did with Newhook for sure, is how your role on the team impacts your production, and the fact that he made it to 70 points while playing kind of a secondary role on the Hurricane. I think this is, well, at least according to his dad, this is one of the reasons why he wants to trade, is that he doesn't see a future top six role for himself in Carolina with the players that are there in place right now, and so.
Mhm.
Um, I think his production the last 2 years, 28 goals last year, 24 goals this year, pretty healthy scoring numbers. Um, you know, does that mean they would want to give him that kind of a contract? He's coming off a bridge, so that's how he's different from Newhook and Doc, is that you're not signing him out of entry level. You're signing him off a bridge, so he's not going to be willing to do another pseudo bridge again. Yeah, that'd be a big commitment on their part, but there's no denying that he would slide in quite nicely among the top six forwards on the Canadians. It's just that he would do so in many other places. I mean, the first thing I think of when I see his profile and what he's done, the first team I think of is the Ducks. You know, with Verbeek saying we want to add a top six
Yeah.
for right shot forward. Well, there's Marty Necas just sitting there, and you know, do the Ducks have more ammunition to make a trade happen with the Hurricanes? Maybe. I mean, they have a pretty decent pipeline themselves. They have a decent kind of war chest of draft picks. Um, that could be a possibility. But I do think that the Hurricanes, and we've mentioned it, but it bears repeating, that the overflow of defense on Montreal, while not super attractive on an individual basis, but like having two of those young defensemen would be cheaper to plug in, that they know they can plug into their defense right now based on how they've already performed in the NHL, would have some value to a team like Carolina, whose defense is perhaps going to be turned upside down. You know, just with
it's going to be decimated.
It's going to be, well, Brett Pesce's basically gone.
Yeah.
Brady Shea sounds like he's basically gone. Jalen Chatfield. Well, I mean, it's going to be, listen, it's going to be tricky. I mean, you have Shea, Pesce, Chatfield, all UFA.
Yeah.
Orlov and Slavin are a year away from UFA. Elliot Friedman was mentioning the other day on 32 Thoughts how he thinks that the Hurricanes are going to sign Slavin to an extension as soon as they're allowed to this summer, which would go into the calculation of how much they can spend on the rest of their defense. Orlov's a year away from UFA. Burns is a year away from UFA. You have Teravainen, Gensel, Necas, Seth Jarvis, all these contracts that are coming up that they need to figure out. So having, let's say, two guys that they could comfortably plug in to their D right now at a relatively cheap price that won't be expensive for the foreseeable future or in the next few years would have some value to this team, I think.
Yeah.
So that's the one thing the Canadiens have, plus the 26th pick. So the two things the Canadiens have, and the Hurricanes are drafting, I believe, 27th, if I'm not mistaken. So that would give them two picks in a row at that range, which is maybe they could use to move up a little bit. But as we just mentioned, it's not always easy, but it's easier with 26 and 27 than it is with 26 and 50, whatever, wherever the Avalanche pick is. So that combined with the need to add some cheap defensemen to allow them to do some of the other things they want to do, could make for a match. But yeah, there's definitely, if Nate just finds himself on the market, there's going to be competition for sure. There's no doubt.
Do you think that the Canadiens have anybody to offer up front?
Sure. They got guys to offer, whether Carolina wants them or not.
No. But I mean, that are, of course,
yeah.
I'm talking about dead weight, but I'm talking about somebody who could be legitimately interesting. Because if I'm the Carolina Hurricanes and my window's open, I want to be able to turn Necas into guys that are cheaper, but that are keeping me competitive.
Well, one guy, and don't laugh, but I mean, I've spoken to more than one professional scout about this. One guy who would fit really well in the way Carolina plays under Rod Brind'Amour is Josh Anderson, for sure. Like a straightforward, straight line, forechecking style. Mm-hmm. That's really they're up front about it. That's the way they play, and he would fit in that kind of a system, or that kind of a play style. So these contracts is still an issue. It's not as if they'd be dying to add, but if he were to get back, and I think the Canadiens have to consider the possibility that Josh Anderson is an excellent bounce back candidate. Like if I'm Josh Anderson, it would be easy in my mind to say I have more of a sample of being a good NHL forward than I do of a bad one. And if you look at how he bounced back after that injury-plagued year in Columbus, he has a history of being able to put a bad season behind him. But it's you look at the way Carolina plays, and Josh Anderson would fit that really well.
Yeah. Well, you see, we talked about you know the Dallas Stars are a big team, right? They're and it's significant in the playoffs how they're a big team, and the Carolina Hurricanes have a lot of smaller forwards, and maybe that they're thinking of something that a way to change the mix a little bit over there because I mean Seth Jarvis is not going anywhere, but he's not the biggest guy. He's got a huge heart, but he's not the biggest guy.
Hmm.
They're probably going to replace some of the guys that are leaving with some of their homegrown talent. But Bradley Nadeau, it's not necessarily a big guy either. He's 5'10",
Yeah.
178. Jackson Blake, that that the guy. I think they signed him out of the NCAA. Again, another guy who's 5'10",
Yeah.
158 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, they
So
drafted
it,
him too, but it's yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. It was his third or fourth round pick, huh? Right. So,
Something like that. Yeah.
yeah, fourth round pick. So they need going to, just playing along with what you were saying about Josh Anderson. At least he would bring something different in that mix.
Hmm.
Uh, and, it could be a reason why they say, well, if Teravainen wants to move also, and we're not ready to give him the money that he would seek, giving it to a bigger guy, a lesser amount, but a bigger guy who's got what 2 or 3 years left on his deal. It would not be so silly.
No, and you look, Carolina has kind of made a habit of going after sort of market inefficiencies at the draft. So if a guy's a little bit smaller, that's why teams didn't pick him. Carolina tends to pick him. If a guy's Russian and that's why he's dropped, Carolina will tend to pick him. It's they are a team that sort of disregards some of the prevailing wisdom in terms of evaluating draft eligible players, and just goes after talent. And so, yeah, they don't have a ton of guys like that in their system. And so listen, I don't know the extent to which they're also a very highly analytically driven organization.
Mm.
Josh Anderson is not someone that a highly analytically driven organization would be all that enticed by. So there's that as well. But, I think play style, like what we said earlier about the Canadians looking at role or circumstances or environment in evaluating a player, it's not unreasonable to think that Carolina would look at Josh Anderson and say, well, he doesn't do all that great there, but the way that Rod plays here, he could fit as a guy who skates fast and he's big and he hits people and he can score goals. I don't think you'd be getting full value for Josh Anderson, but just the fact of taking that contract on would add value for Carolina as well, probably because you're getting him. Yeah. You're going to get him at a discount of some way, either with Montreal throwing in a draft pick, whether that's number 26, it could be. So yeah, I think I don't know how possible that is, but just purely from an outsider's view, he's definitely a guy who would fit there.
Yeah.